Okay, well, I will start us out saying thank you for coming. And this is now Unit 5, our last unit. In Unit 5 has changed from what it was last year. Unit 5 only has 2 lessons, and we took that is because everything that used to be in Lesson 1 got moved into Unit 4. And now we have Unit 2, Lesson 2 is about trade, and Lesson 3 is about immigration. And those are kind of exciting topics right now. So do not even try to do Lesson 1. Start with Lesson 2. And I think Andrea and Sharon are going to start us off in Lesson 2 about trade.
Okay. Yep, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Let's see, here we go. Oops. So in Unit 5, like we said, it covers movement. And we used to start with cultural diffusion in that, but we felt like that was a better fit to slide that into Unit 4, culture. But it's still, it's kind of a nice bridge between the two units. Oops. So the compelling question that we have is, how do people, or excuse me, how do trade and migration affect people in different places? And so that's going to be our focus. We're going to look at those two different concepts of trade and migration. And in the lesson 2, which is the first lesson of Unit 5, we're going to take a look specifically at trade. So we have a supporting question: why do people engage in trade? And we're going to start with, there's a couple of activities that we start with early on that have to do with just getting some vocabulary, some terms, some information to share with the students and to get them thinking about what trade is. So this is a nice little activity, and it's something they can also participate in at home, whether they're in person or virtual. So we talk about what trade is and an exchange of money for services and goods, and what's the difference between those. We go into more detail about goods and services following this particular PowerPoint. Where things are manufactured or grown. We're going to take a look at some labels. It's a real easy activity. Here's some examples of what we've included, just to show that it seems like those are labels that we see everywhere and we're kind of used to. Excuse me. And we find them in a variety of different, on a variety of different products. Sometimes we have to really hunt for them, and sometimes they're pretty obvious. That means that we also have to, we can find those kinds of labels on food as well. And, just all kinds of things around the house, tools and so forth. And so we start to talk about the variety of these different locations, where they're coming from. We can even take a closer look at some things like medicine and healthcare needs, and where they come from as well. And so this is an example. This is a world map, and it shows there's a key here of all these different types of clothing. So this is what one person found in their closet when they started going through their clothes and their labels on the clothes. And so hopefully we can see from this, the kids start to understand that it seems like there is a pretty wide variety of countries that these products have ended up in a person's closet here in the United States, and that. Um, and it's quite a variety, not just located in one country or on one continent, but it's fairly spread out. Students can make some general statements about that as well, where they see some of these labels or the symbols for these labels, where they are, and some places where they are not. Whoops. And so then a closer look at it, we talk about the different countries and that are also a part of this. So it's like kind of a nice way to get them again familiar with the world map, not just the continents, but also focusing in on some of our some of these countries that we'll be talking about more. So this is where we kind of either, if they're in person, send them home, or if they are at home already virtually, then they can kind of go through and look for some different things, look in their closets, look in their pantries, wherever, and see where they can find labels of where these products have been produced or manufactured. And then they're going to share that information with the rest of the class, and we'll kind of, it's an activity to collect some data with that as well. Let's see. So there's a student activity that goes along with it. And again, because I teach virtually, I push this out as a digital notebook page. And here we have the example or the reminders for them to take a look at where products are made. We look for those labels, and then they would record their information. So a teacher in person could print this off and hand it to their students. They could have their students create a chart in their notebook. And they could also use this digitally and add text boxes to it to add in the information that goes along with what they find. So we thought that 10 labels would be a pretty good opportunity for them to investigate what's in their homes. And we didn't want to leave it all just up to clothing or focus on one category only. So we were hoping that they could take a look at many different products, and then to see were there any countries that seem to be in common. Several items were from, making some kind of connection with where they're located geographically. Last thing is, then there's also a world map, and asking students to to determine some of the place or some of the products that they have and where they are from, and also to be able to identify those countries where they seem to be have of quite a few items from. So they can add on to it and add that information to their map. Again, when we do it digitally, it's pretty easy for them to, let me exit from the full screen, for them to create a text box and include that, or they could even put in some pictures or symbols that they could add to their notebook page. So that was kind of getting them started on trade and how things can be made or manufactured in one location, whoops, and then end up in another location. Let's see. And then Sharon.
Yep.
It looks like you're up next.
Okay. So are you opening or am I?
Oh, it doesn't matter. You want to open it? Would you want to do that instead of me? Can you share your screen?
Yeah, Dave and I checked that beforehand.
Okay,
It doesn't matter. You can open it up. I mean, you've got it there.
okay. So that first one we're going to take a look at is the important jobs graph. So looking at graphs, other visual aids for students. So I'll go ahead and open that for you.
So we're switching and we're going to talk about, one, reading graphs. Also being a math teacher, we focus on graphs a lot in our program because we know that that's one of the areas our students tend to be weak on. And so all of our graphs are not going to look the same, but we also give hints as to how to read them a little easier for some students. And we make a lot of them visual. That helps our special ed students, our ESL students. They learn visually better than just listening to a teacher talk, along with them being involved in it. So we're going to look at graphs about jobs in the US and um, kind of focus on Michigan. So this is just a basic graph showing that there was something that was at around 40, and we're not talking to them about millions or billions. We're just talking about the number 40. And then that was at an earlier time. And then now we're talking more to present, and they're looking at the number 9. And we just ask them what they see. And most of the students are going to say it's dropping. And so what we want to do is start talking to them about the verbiage that's used when we're talking about graphs. So sometimes if we take out details, students can see the focus a little bit easier. Instead of having all the grid lines in, just remove them so that they can see the information that we're actually trying to get them to look at. Then you can put the grid lines back in. And this is where the term downward trend. We also talked to them about the fact that we just kind of draw a straight line, and you draw it through the data. And so they can see that it's kind of like a slide, and you're going to go, it starts up and then it just continues to slide down. And I would extend it a little bit and say, so that, is this a slow ride down or is this going pretty fast? And they get the idea that it's on a pretty steady slide down. I mean, this is going to be a quick slide if you look at it over time. And then we talk about that this is a graph talking about manufacturing goods, and it's the percentage of jobs in the US. Some students will understand that percentage word, other students won't. So you have to explain it a little bit more. But the big picture is really just getting them to understand manufactured goods, the percentage that has been done in the US has declined. If we start looking from 1950, and for our kids now, you kind of have to talk to them about their grandparents during their lifetime. But we're only talking 50 years, and it's dropped from 40% down to 9. So what's caused it? Here's the big why. Let the students predict before you go into anything. Predicting is really big for students, especially at our 10, 11, 12 age. If they start predicting, then you start getting an idea on how much are they really reading a graph, how much are they pulling in from knowledge that they either have prior, or they're starting to take things from their math class and actually apply them in their social studies class or from their science class. So we simply talk about how percentage is brought about So if the teacher is not real comfortable with it, you can just read exactly what it is. And then why? Why is there a lower percentage of workers that have manufacturing jobs now? So we're going to present possible causes or reasons for that happening. The teacher needs to be aware on this, that we don't necessarily have concrete answers on everything in this lesson. They're going to predict, they're going to have some things to fall back on for like the why, where are you getting your prediction from? You can say, where are you getting this from? What's helping to support your prediction? But we don't have all the answers here. So we're simply going to go through and talk about the trend over 50 years. So it's going to show the total number of jobs that were in manufacturing. The first graph showed the percentage of jobs. Now we're going to talk about the total number. So the first thing you want them to understand is that we're talking millions of jobs. So you want them reading that left edge of the graph so that they understand it. And then you want them to look at the years on the bottom from 1950 to 2010 so that they know what we're talking about. And once again, you talk to them about, so what's happening with this graph? The first thing they're going to tell you is they can't draw a straight line because they see that arc, and so they'll start saying, well, it's kind of gone up and down and there's all these hills and valleys. And you say, but we need to see a trend. We're looking for that trend. The next thing they're going to talk about is the fact that it started at about 12 and we're back at 12. So some of them may think this is just, a pattern. And that's why we can talk to them about what may be causing it. We can talk to them about changes we're seeing. But some of your students are not going to be convinced manufacturing has changed a lot. They're going to see that beginning number and the end number, and they're going to notice at the end, the trend is starting to go back up again. And they want to hang on that, but it's going up again. So let them make decisions. It's okay. So now we start giving them questions. And they have to determine from the graph which ones are true. Total number of manufacturing jobs has stayed roughly the same, or the manufacturing jobs has gone up in some years and down in other years. And they're simply marking A or B. Then again, they go to C and D. Highest number of manufacturing jobs was around 1980, or the highest number of manufacturing jobs was after the year 2000. Once again, we're just getting them to read the graph. If our students can't read the graphs, they can't begin to answer a question or predict. So we give them the answers, or give you the answers, so that there isn't any question on where we're heading, our focus. Andrea, can you keep going? Thanks. What we do know is the decline after 1980. And that's a huge problem for the people that were in those manufacturing jobs. And so, some of the kids will have stories. They're going to say, yeah, my grandpa was laid off or whatever. You have to regulate how much you're going to allow that sharing, because it can take over your classroom. So currently, why are there fewer manufacturing jobs? So we asked them, what kind of a job do you see in the pictures below? The one on the left, they're going to say it's a really old picture. So we need to talk to them about that. Black and white photos were big for a very long time. So it is during the same time frame that we're doing the graph on. But they'll notice that the women are sewing, and then in 2, they'll notice the robotics, and 3, they'll say, well, that's nurses, it's like a hospital. And so you have to talk to them about what kind of a career, it's nursing career, but do you know what section it falls into? And some of them are not going to be familiar with the word, hospitality. So, or a service career. So we need to help them with that, unless if they've been given that vocabulary ahead of time. So then we talk about on the number of pictures that are the pictures are numbered to the questions. Which manufacturing jobs have moved to other countries, which have been taken over by technology, which is robots or computers, and who has chosen to work in the service job area rather than manufacturing jobs. And that's where a lot of our people have moved to, that were in those manufacturing jobs. So these are the 3 questions we are focusing the students on. And then as we study trade, they'll get more of that information to be able to support their answers when we ask them about the same thing near the end. So then we move into talking about robots and computers as a trend in manufacturing, because technology's affected all of us. And this year, it's affected more people than ever. So some jobs have simply been taken over by technology. So the Kalamazoo Gazette in 2017, 5 reality checks if you think you can't lose your job to a robot. The article says that jobs of the future will require social and literacy skills. So we kind of explain what those are. It's teamwork, it's problem solving. They need to know math computation, and all the kids will groan, or a large portion of them. And then reading and writing and being able to explain. And students don't always want to believe they have to be able to do the things that we're teaching them, but this is a really good instrument to be able to get them to understand it. So how do you prepare for teamwork and problem solving? And when do people learn their literacy skills? How do they learn how to do math and reading and writing? It's really important students start talking about that and understanding it. So the federal government keeps track of our occupations. So on the next slide, we're going to find both higher paying jobs and lower paying jobs. And so the higher your job skill or your job pay, the higher your skills have to be. And all we've done is focus on 2 things: home health and personal care aides. They make about $25,000 a year. And then a nurse practitioner makes $109,000. The students will understand the difference between 25 and 109. If there's 1,000 behind it or not, they're going to know which one's higher. The problem is many of our students are going to think $25,000 is a lot of money. And we don't want this to become a economics lesson. We just want them to see, depending on what you are hoping to make, you're going to have to know more skills than what you think you might need. So which jobs are growing faster, meaning that they need to add workers? So we're going to find out that that the skills that require more learning, which means beyond high school, are our data scientists, mathematical science occupations, drill operators for oil and gas. Animal caretakers make half of what a drill operator makes. So you might really love animals and want to take care of them, but that's really not a livable wage. And then you can look up and, you know, talk to them about the ones in between. We want to make sure students don't feel that an occupation that they're interested in isn't worthwhile going for and making a goal. But we do want them to understand that there's differences in how much you make depending on what you do and how much you know. And you can't do some jobs if you don't have those skills. So how can people prepare for jobs during times when technology is changing? So it explores the skills that people learn for manufacturing jobs. So metal and plastic machine workers are the example we get. Think of how many goods that we buy that are made of plastic and or metal. Workers use complicated machines to make plastic and metal parts. You know, and we were talking about when we were getting this ready, we were talking about the fact that a car mechanic used to actually tinker with the car and repair it. And now the first thing they have to do is hook it up to a computer to find out where the problem is before they can even begin working on it, because we have so many computer chips embedded within our car. So then we look at manufacturing through time. Once again, they're going to, this is the student paper that you can either hand out digitally or you can print it and hand it to them themselves. They're going to look for the highest percent and circle it, find the lowest percent, circle it, and draw that line. So this is going to mirror everything that we've just talked about as far as the student pages.
Oops. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So we've been talking about, you know, just starting to get them thinking about different kinds of jobs and that. Now we're going to take a look at what we refer to as big jobs and other jobs. And that's one of the things that, you know, some people get a little anxious when they have to talk about economic terms and trying to make sense of all that. So we try to make it as simple as we can, but also get the students to connect with the information. So in this particular presentation, we're going to take a look at big jobs in the sense of what kind of an impact they have on their community. And so when we look at big jobs, it's not necessarily that it has to require a lot of people, but that it has a big impact on their local community or their state. That gets kids thinking about it a little bit differently. So we call them big jobs. And we talk to the students about what big jobs are. It really represents basic income generating jobs. But this is where money is coming into the area, coming into the community or into the state or even into the country from outside places. So again, we are extending what we are looking at as far as trade. And being able to have that interaction, not just locally, but globally. We have to kind of put it in the lens of globally. So we go through and talk to the students about that. A person doing a big job is going to make something or grow something or, you know, dig something up. or maybe they do a service. They're in the service industry. Something that can be sold outside of our local area. And so you can have students brainstorm a little bit to see if they are on the right track with this. Because sometimes just based on, their own personal experience or family experiences and that may be a little bit more than what they understand. So this is a really good opportunity to kind of build in some class discussion with it. There's also examples in here to support the teacher and the students in their thinking. So we look at a few examples of what big jobs are, and also we're going to look at what are not big jobs. They're still important jobs, but they may not bring in that kind of outside interest, outside income. So first one we look at is a college professor, and I like the way this is set up. So you can get the kids to think and talk a little bit about it before you start to reveal the information about what do they think in terms of a college professor. Would that be considered a big job or not a big job? Well, it could be a big job, obviously, if there are students that are coming in from all over the United States to a college here in Michigan or University of Michigan, or even people outside of the United States. But then we also talk about it maybe could also be considered not a big job if it is a smaller college or community college that is most of the students come from within that local area. Look at a few more examples and we'll go through pretty much the same thing. A restaurant owner. Would it be a big job if people, really want to come to it and will, be attracted to it, to even travel to get to the restaurant? Or will it be just someone or a small restaurant in the local community that is really popular, but maybe only has customers that are from that community? And then we continue on in this one. Students are usually pretty good about this. They have a pretty good understanding that they know that growing fruit here in Michigan is an important industry. And so that they do have I found that they've had a pretty good understanding of how much our markets are extended out beyond Michigan because of the things that we grow here in Michigan. And so again, we kind of leave that open where people are coming from or companies and possibly even other countries that are purchasing some of these agricultural products. Or is it a local, is it a small fruit grower and they're just maybe selling their fruit at a local farm market? So again, here we go. If it's people or if it's companies or stores from another state, or if it's just the local community. So obviously we want to get them to understand this a little bit more about this money that's coming into the community. That's what we consider these big jobs. And again, that's what we're looking at, is where does this money come from that's going to pay these workers? So if they're producing products and things like that or services to be sold outside of their hometown, their state, or their country, then yes, it's considered a big job. When money does come into a community from an outside place, that helps everyone in the community, especially people with other jobs. And those are the jobs that maybe aren't as widespread or have such an impact nationally or internationally. Big jobs are considered multipliers. So they multiply the money that comes in from outside the local community. An example here would be if we have someone that's a big job worker and they go to and they get paid and they go to the store, buy some groceries and that. So here's the big job worker taking their money, their paycheck to the grocery store. They're going to purchase some items. What happens with that money that was brought into the community through that big job worker's paycheck? It goes out into so many different areas. The people that work at the store will then continue to, they'll get their paycheck and spend their money in local restaurants, theaters, and things like that. The manager of the store is going to pay the truck drivers and all of the places that they get their goods from. And so we continue to see that money grow and have a bigger impact. And again, so that's why sometimes it's hard to think about it if it's somewhat abstract for the students. That's why we want to rely on several different examples for them and then get to the point of why it's so important. It has a huge impact on their local community. And so every place needs at least one big job. But pretty typical. Usually there's only a small fraction of the people actually doing the big jobs. Everyone else is doing those jobs that we call just other jobs, which are important, but they're getting paid and they're buying things within their community. And so obviously there can be an impact if the big jobs are not successful, or if something happens to those big jobs, it's going to affect people in other jobs. And that's going to make it difficult. And, you know, boy, our kids have experienced so many ups and downs in this past year, but the economic impact on their families, I think that this is going to resonate with a lot of them as far as what they've had to go through. And so again, we want to just be able to have this discussion without making students you know, struggle with what their family is going through or being uncomfortable talking about it. We can talk about it more in an abstract sense of big jobs and other jobs. So here's an example. If we have something like a big job employer closes, that could be, again, something that happens. What if a large automobile assembly plant that makes cars closes? Or what if a vacation recreation center closes? What is going to happen? And we can kind of brainstorm what will happen. What did they see maybe happen with some of the things that changed or were closed temporarily during the pandemic and that. We've got some other information about what happens when these big jobs leave a community or no longer have an impact on a community. Let's see, does anyone in my local community or my state do big jobs that bring in money? So there's a lot of different examples that we can use. And we start with one here. This is, we were talking about the college professor. That was one of our first examples. And here, interesting fact that we have over 32,000 international students that are enrolled in Michigan colleges and universities. And the impact that that has on our economy with close to $1 billion. So once again, that is a big job for the state of Michigan. Other things, for instance, our agricultural industry, that we sell so many agricultural products besides food, potted plants and so forth. And that's a huge impact. That's considered another big job. what other big jobs are in Michigan? People in other parts of the world buy products made in Michigan. So here's an example where it's not a super big company, but it has a far-reaching impact by selling products to places all around the world. So we have this small manufacturing company, makes fire protection equipment for boats and ships, which we know are all over the world, located in Michigan, Western Michigan. And this is, these are some of the countries that purchase these products. So it's not just to one particular continent, but it's several different countries around the world. I really like this map, and the kids always take a look at it to see how much of an impact one company can have and how far they can extend their reach. And what that means is these products are being exported to other countries around the world, and the money that they pay for these products is being brought back into our local communities, our local community here in Michigan, and having an impact on people in other jobs. So real quick summary then, we want to try to think of things that people in our state sell to other people or to people in other countries. That's what we refer to as exports. So what's built or created or grown here in Michigan and sent to other countries. Or then once we do that, we start to think about what do we bring into the state of Michigan from other countries. And that kind of goes back to what they looked at with their, when they first started this whole unit on trade with looking at labels and that. So that was, let's see, I think, yep, there's a student activity. Oops, sorry, wrong one. Nope, there wasn't a student activity with that. Carol, it looks like you're up and you're going to talk a little bit more about exports in particular. So I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, okay, good. I'm going to be talking about what some of the big jobs that Michigan has, and by talking about exports from Michigan, we're going to see what Michigan exports. Is Michigan like Texas or like Iowa, or does it have its own special set of things that it exports? We're also going to look at what countries buy a lot of Michigan exports. So, let's see. I got it going here. Okay. There's a wonderful website. It's called trade.gov, where I got the information. They've updated it from when I last was there. It's really quite nice. You can look at individual states. Again, it's really important that students remember that exporting means that, for example, the people in Michigan are selling goods to other places, to other countries outside of the US. We're going to be looking at what Michigan exports, what is exported from Iowa, and what is exported from Texas. Would you have any ideas what Michigan might really excel at selling to other parts of the world? Or what Iowa sells large amounts, or Texas? Well, we'll see. This is, by and large, if you look at the graph over on the right-hand side, there's something called, it's a whole set of jobs. It's a sector of jobs. It's many, many companies, but in some way, all of the companies produce transportation equipment. Michigan really brings in not almost $20 billion by selling transportation equipment. Can you think of some transportation equipment companies? And hopefully the students will think of Ford or General Motors or Chrysler, or maybe they know about the smaller manufacturing plant in their town that makes parts for Ford or General Motors. Okay, we'll go on. Texas is different. You don't see transportation equipment at the very top of what Texas exports. Texas is a really big state. It is a really big state with underground, beneath rock layers in Texas is a lot of oil and gas, and Texas sells that oil and gas, which it also processes into, it makes petroleum and coal products. So we can see that Texas has resources that it uses, and it brings money into Texas, into the United States by exporting them. Iowa is a smaller state, so you don't see as high of billions of dollars. It has many fewer people living in it. But the big thing that Iowa exports, as you can see from this side of the graph, is processed foods, which really depends on all of the corn and soybeans and hogs and cattle and chickens that are grown in Iowa and then turned into meat products or other food products. So just to review that, or trying to ask students, what do they remember about what is the big job? What is the type of export that the top export that's coming out of each of the states? And here's an answer. And hopefully we'll get the students thinking about, each state has something it does really well for some reason, maybe because it has oil resources or because it has some really productive companies and workers or some really productive farmers. The next set of things, this is available on the website that tells you about exports from each state. And why do you think, is there any idea that you would have about why Michigan exports the highest amount to Canada? And here it would be good if the students have a map in their head, but Canada is right next to Michigan, separated sometimes by river or lake. But Canada is our biggest buyer. Mexico is next, China is third. Texas, turns out, exports a huge amount to Mexico. And soon we'll look at a map, but we'll see that Mexico is right next door to Texas. But Mexico and Canada come up as the top two, and then China is third. There was a lot of talk about what we buy and sell from China. So it's kind of interesting that our states are selling to China. Finally, Iowa exports a lot to Canada, but also to Mexico, and China is third. Here we have the map, and you'll have to let me know if I should have showed it to you sooner. If we look at North America, we see Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And here, just to focus in on them, I've circled Canada and Mexico as our next door neighbors. And that is important because right now there is a trade agreement called the US for US, M for Mexico, C for Canada, A for agreement. this is a trade agreement that has a really important section that says if Canada buys something from any place in the United States, including Michigan, Canada does not have to pay any taxes, no tariffs. This is an agreement among the three countries that when they buy things from each other, they don't have to pay any taxes. And so we've gotten a little bit further beyond exports to the notions about agreements about exporting and importing. If people in other states or if your students want to look up other states, they can do that. So I think I'm going to hand this off now to Sharon. And so I should stop sharing my screen.
Oh, my camera is down, so Andrea is actually going to have her video on while I talk about the literature. Andrea, are you there? Andrea's not there yet, so I'm going to start talking. I'm sorry you can't see me. My camera is not working right now. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the books. Oh, there's Andrea. The first book is Small Acts of Amazing Courage by Gloria Wellen. And this is actually the book that we started in Unit 4, and we're continuing it. The first book was All My Wonderful Dreams and Wild Adventures. I can't remember the title exactly. And then this is the follow-up, and it continues the life of her in India and all of the cultural events that happen in her life. So a continued read. Then we go into several what we call trade books. And the first book is Oxcart Man. And you can see it's a very thin book. There are just a few pages. It does not take that long to read, but it is a story about a family who makes goods throughout a year for the father to leave the home, go to town, sell all of the goods, and then come back on foot. I mean, he sells everything. And when he gets home, they start the year over doing the same thing. It's totally family focused, but it talks about that continuation of goods to selling the goods to coming home and manufacturing more. Quick read, kids understand it very easily. It's an excellent book and is one of our Caldecott Award winner books. Our next one is Abula's Weave. And this is also an award-winning book. This is about a young girl, once again about the age of our students, who is learning the trade of her culture. And she's learning it from her grandmother. Even though manufacturing is taking over, she's learning how to weave. And it goes through the process of talking about Abula learning to weave, but there's also an undertone that grandmother does not sell the products because she has a birthmark on her face and people will shy away from her. So Abula is going to the market to sell her wares. And it talks about the very fine hand done weaving that she has done, and she sells all her wares. Grandmother's with her, but is very much in the background of this. But once again, it's making and creating, manufacturing the good to sell. And the last short one that we have is called Hiromi's Hands. This is of a family who immigrates to the US from Japan. Father is a sushi chef, and not an easy combination to say. But he starts at the bottom, works his way up, and as his family grows, his daughter is very interested in his trade. And so she starts wanting to go with him, watch him. So he has her do the same things, starting with scrubbing the floors. And she sticks with it. And she eventually becomes one of the first female women to become a chef in New York City or in New York, might be just New York. This wouldn't have happened if they would have stayed in Japan. And this is based on a true story. There is a picture of the Hiromi in the back of the book. But they moved here, and her father realized for opportunities, he wanted to move to the US because he did not have the same opportunities that in Japan that he would have here. You can also use references going back to Secret of the Andes and Chuju's House, which is back from Unit 1 and 2. You don't have to go back into the book, but recall some of the things that have happened that relate in the same manner. And the kids know the stories, and so all of that comes back. They lead into great discussions. But these books are short, they're quick, but it lends itself to the manufacturing piece so that they all understand really what is happening. And that's all of our literature for Unit 5, Lesson 2. Oh, Lesson 1 now, sorry. Carol, it's back to you.
Sorry?
It's back to you for the supply chain.
Oh, am I doing supply chain? Oh, okay.
Are you okay?
I can figure it out. Let me, supply chain. I've got let me try to share and then find that. Okay. Let me just go to the lesson. And let me go down to supply chain. Can you see where I am?
Yes.
Okay, I'm getting there. See if I can make this go. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'll do it. I'll try to do it like Andrea does it. I'll present. It just has to load. Sorry, the things take a little bit to load because we have an awful lot of graphics from the beginning. How's that? Can you see? Well, all right.
Now you can.
We're going to be talking, I don't know if students have ever heard of supply chains. It's like, what is a chain? Or what does it mean to assemble parts? Well, the way I was going to try to introduce this is to ask, what do smartphones and automobiles have in common? And well, they sure aren't the same size, but what they have in common is that they both, cell phones, smartphones get assembled by putting lots of pieces together. Cars get assembled by putting lots of pieces together. So we're defining the word assembly as bringing and fitting together many parts to make a product. And what I depend on using not copyrighted graphics. So this looks like before I was born or when I was a little kid. This is a diagram of an assembly plant. And what we ask the students to do is look at all of the buildings in this diagram, and can you figure out what parts get put together based on this diagram to make a car. Now, what I need to add is nowadays, the parts could come from 100 miles away. They could even come from 2,000 or 9,000 miles away. But let's go on and just see, glass gets put together with steel bodies, with engines, with tires. So you finally get a car. To talk a little bit more about supply chains in order to bring all those parts together from long distances, and that's what happens today. Parts travel in containers on trains. They travel on truck, back of the trailers and the containers on the backs of trucks. Parts even travel across oceans in what are called containers. So, where do iPhones really come from? This is a much smaller product, but it also consists of parts. This is based on a business magazine article that I found, a trade journal. A lot of smartphones, especially Apple's iPhone, a lot of smartphones are assembled, put together in China. But not all of the parts come from China. China has to get parts from other places. And this is what I learned in a 2016 article from Business Magazine. China, from different places in China come batteries, something called the Wi-Fi module, the body, kind of the outside of the iPhone, rare minerals that make the tiny magnets that are used inside of our iPhones. But the camera and the display and the chips inside the iPhone that our photos are stored on, that comes from Japan. South Korea makes memory that helps our apps open up faster and processors that run the apps. Taiwan also makes processors. I don't know if the students have a mental map, but we will show them a map. Are these countries close together? For a while, there were a few parts that came from the US, which is much farther away from China than Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan are. On this map, 6 of the parts are made here in China. Some of the parts are made in Taiwan, in South Korea, in Japan. This is again going back to, if you bring parts together from different countries, do you have to have agreements about how you're going to trade with each other? And what used to be called NAFTA, for North American Free Trade Agreement, is now called Mexico, US, Canada Agreement. But this movement of parts, we do a lot of importing of parts. For example, for cars, parts get imported from Mexico, parts get imported from Canada. Canada imports parts from the US. It's a big trading agreement. We're going to look at the travels of a steering wheel. Students will all be aware of the steering wheels in their car. Our example starts out in a factory in the US. It could be Michigan, could be Ohio or Indiana, where a steel bar, a straight piece of steel, is shaped into a circle for the steering wheel. And then lots and lots of those steel-shaped steering wheels, circular steering wheels, get put on trucks or trains, and they're shipped to Mexico, where workers generally are paid less than US workers. And the workers in Mexico put a nice, sometimes leather, sometimes a real nice plastic covering around that bare steel, so it's much easier to touch in the winter or in the summer in hot and cold weather. From Mexico, the covered steering wheels get shipped back to the US, perhaps to Michigan, but also to other parts of the United States, where that steering wheel becomes a really important part of a car that is being put together from parts. What we have is an activity, and there's a choice of at least 5 videos where students can look at a video about how assembly gets done in automobile assembly factories. And I find it really fascinating. Some of the videos are 3 minutes long, some are longer. And what the students really should watch for is who's doing the work. Is it a person? Is it a robot? And they should watch for, where is this assembly factory located? Is it in the US? Is it in Canada, Mexico, or Germany? So yeah, that takes us. So I think that's my part. Okay, oh, now I get to do wage differences. Okay, let me do wage differences. Let me see if I can just get to that from here. Okay, let me move on down. Okay. I honestly have to tell you that I struggle with this one. I don't have zingy videos for this. And you need to let me know if you think of a way to make it zingier, but it's got a really important message at the end. And I think this is, let's see, oh, I probably should be looking at the Google Slides, sorry. Duh. I'm learning how to present. It, it, it's really important, I think, how we started out when we were looking in closets and refrigerators and garages for what do we have in our house? What have our families bought? Because that was really good background for talking about imports and exports. And imports and exports are really pretty basic, and we're going to get to a little bit more complicated stuff later on. I think we saw that much of the clothing and shoes, some of the electronics. I know that the vehicle that is sitting in my garage, it was either assembled in Mexico or it was assembled in Korea. And its engine came all the way from Austria. So I know that imports are a part of what my family has purchased. And imports are what come from other countries. This brings us back to the idea of big jobs. We kind of, I think, appreciated that it's nice that Michigan sells things to other parts of the world or to other states. But let's just look at selling things to other parts of the world. For example, even China. It's nice when we export because that brings money into Michigan, into the US. Because if we sell to China, they have to pay us. Sometimes I think students just need to write something down and then talk about it. Exports are what our country, people in a country, sell to other countries. Imports are what people in a country buy from other countries. And my graphic, I don't know if this helps, but I want to make sure that we communicate that when the United States buys imports, we have to pay other countries. When the United States sells exports, we get money coming in from other countries. This is going to be important when we talk about comparing how much do we export, how much do we import, and we get to a really new word probably for sixth graders, and that is trade deficit. And let's try an example and see if we can make sense of comparing imports and exports. I have examples from 2016. I can update them, but this was easier for now. Apparel is clothing. And the United States in 2016 imported $88 billion worth of all sorts of clothing. Could be your jeans, could be your pajamas, could be your hats. 88 billion. Did the US export any apparel, this big category? Well, it exported about 3 billion. If we look at just apparel, the difference is a deficit of 85 billion. We pay out a whole lot more than we get coming in. Next example is road vehicles, meaning cars and trucks. I didn't realize, I thought, oh gosh, you know, Ford and General Motors and Chrysler, surely they export, and they do. You can see that we export, the United States exported in 2016, you know, more than 100 billion of road vehicles. Only problem is we import it way more than we export it, so we have a deficit. This is a kind of minus number. And you guys certainly, please do holler at me if this is not going to communicate with sixth graders. There is kind of a bright spot. The United States apparently is really good at selling banking services or selling insurance or selling education to, or medical care to other countries. These are services. They're not like a car. They're a service where I get to see what's in my bank account. I know that I'm insured in case my house, there's a fire at my house or a tornado. Services, the United States exported more than it imported. So that's called a trade surplus. I found a really up-to-date, this just came out in February, a really up-to-date summary of all the kinds of exports and imports, everything, goods and services, everything that the United States does. And can you see those orange columns? And every year, the orange column is higher than the blue column. We imported more than we export it every year. And this is a complicated problem. Yep, imports are higher than exports. Every year there's what we call a trade deficit. There are people who worry about this. And they ask, they make proposals. And if we read this blue proposal, it says there are some people in the United States. I'm a consumer. I buy things. And I kind of like to go to the big box stores like Myers or Home Depot or Target. I kind of like to, or Walmart. I kind of like to go and buy some imported goods because they seem to not cost so much. If you don't go to big box stores, you might go to dollar stores. And I swear, when I look at clothing in these stores, it is not made in the United States. So, I mean, there are people who like things, my jeans to cost less or my sneakers to cost less. There are some stores that like to sell things that cost less. That's in the red section here. On the other hand, there are workers who used to make refrigerators in the United States, and most of the refrigerator factories moved to Mexico, for example. And there are workers because, and I need to turn this on, workers in several other countries, and we'll see that very soon, are willing to work for much lower pay than workers in the United States. Big problem. I have a chart, and hopefully you can see the bars. It goes across the bottom. You can earn $1 an hour. You can earn more than $30 an hour. You can earn more than $40 an hour. See those little tiny bars for China and India? China and India are parts of the world where there are so many people. Remember their huge populations that we learned about in Unit 2 about population and Unit 4 where we talked about India? This is the largest population in the world, the second largest population in the world. Workers work, at least in 2010, were working for under $2 an hour. And how does that compare with what workers are generally paid in the United States? Well, we ask that question and then we go, well, China, India, Latin America, Eastern Europe, those are all parts of the world where workers work for lower pay. Most of the low pay work is in manufacturing where people assemble parts for the cell phones or the computers or the cars, or even clothing is assembled from parts into the shirt that I buy. I looked up, it's hard to find the data, and I'm sorry, it's a while ago, but back in 2009, the average hourly pay in India was $1.24 and only slightly higher in China. I've read some articles that say that this is heading up toward $3 an hour in China nowadays by 2020, but still, generally jobs in the United States pay $30 or more per hour on average. And this brings us to outsourcing. Outsourcing means when a company like Apple that designed the iPhone, but Apple says we want workers in China to put the pieces of the iPhone together and then ship it back to the United States where we sell it. That's called outsourcing or offshoring because workers will work for less pay per hour in other countries. Some people think that if we put a tax on what people buy, let's say we put a tax on clothing that comes from China, or we put a tax on cars that come from Germany. And just to show you that countries do use taxes or tariffs to persuade people to buy only what's made in their country. China, or okay, let's take a vehicle called a Jeep Wrangler. If you buy that in the United States, it costs about $41,000. If the United States tries to sell a Jeep Wrangler in China, China adds a huge tariff that makes the same identical vehicle cost $71,000. So what kind of cars do you think people in China are going to buy if they have to face those kind of tariffs? I think I'll stop here because we have something about containers. And I will stop sharing.
Thanks, Carol. So Sharon and I will share some information about, it's an example of how things can be so inexpensive in these big box stores, even when the items are being produced in a different part of the world. And there's obviously transportation costs that's involved with, bringing those items into the United States. And so this information kind of takes us through that with, it shows us just how they can make it cost effective, and these big box stores can sell items inexpensively that are produced in other parts of the world. So we've already seen the example that the wages of workers have a huge impact. Obviously, if they're paying workers more money to produce a product, they would have to charge more for that product. For instance, like if it was made here in the United States, if that same product is made in another country where someone is working for $2 an hour instead of $30 an hour, that's a huge savings. And so the company could still make the product in another country and bring it back into the United States and sell it for a profit. So we're going to look at shipping containers and why manufacturers and big stores use them. So let me just go through this, and then we'll go through the math on this. So this is a really good example of shipping containers. They're basically what they, the big part or the box part of a semi. And so in order for them to be transported from different parts of the world across the ocean and that, they've got to load them up. So now we've got these huge container ships that are traveling all over from country to country throughout the world. And they can obviously carry quite a few of those containers on them. Oops.
Many of your students, you'll find when they see that picture, they've never seen a ship with this many containers on it. And they're just like in awe that they have that many containers on it. And then they start wondering why the ship doesn't sink. And I always, instead of getting into that explanation, I just go, well, that's where science comes into this. So it's a good question for the science teacher, but we're going to say ships float and these are loaded. And then the next thing they want to do is they want to count the number of containers on this ship. And we're actually going to take them through an activity. So I just tell them to, wait a few minutes and we'll get there.
This was a great example of one. Here's a video link or a website where you can go and take a look at Vessel Finder. You can track ships. There's always a few kids that kind of geek out on that. So that gives them an opportunity to kind of explore and see where ships are and tracking them around the world and that. So again, this has a direct impact then on what we do, and for many of us, what we can relate to, which is making a run to Walmart or Target and buying items there in the stores and expecting low prices. And part of that is not just the generosity of the people that own these stores, but it is because they are still making money on it. So they're obviously able to purchase them large quantities for very low prices, and then add on a little bit for profit and still sell it at a low price.
Roy, can you expand on what you just wrote?
Yeah, just the idea of getting students the idea of how big that container is. One way to do that is to say, yes, that's like a semi truck. But if you were to show a series of pictures of a student or a person standing next to a semi truck, and then that semi truck next to a couple of those containers in the shipyard, and then show them on the ship, they might have a better understanding of how massive those ships are and how much can be contained in one of those containers and the amount of product.
No, I really like that. That's why I wanted you to expand, because I was reading it, but not sure I was interpreting it correctly.
Yeah, unless they've been to a shipyard or they see something next to something. I see the picture you have up now, the tall cranes unloading containers. That helps a little bit, but for them to telescope themselves down into a position to realize the massiveness of these ships and the containers, I think it's difficult for them to wrap their head around it. I'm sure Phil and Carol could talk about the spatial understanding of that one.
Right. No, I think that's a great idea. Carol, did you get that written down?
I do. I do.
And then we'll check your website out. Right. Thanks. I'm sorry, Andrea. I just happened to read his note and wanted to make sure I was interpreting it right.
And I know we do, I've looked at so many PowerPoints, but I know that we do have some pictures coming up that show.
But I think to do it earlier would be good.
Yeah. And I think it shows a car next to the ship and then next to the dock and everything else. So, but I like your thinking with that, Roy. Let's see. So we give them some data and take them through, how countries are, and it's just going back to that same thing that we know that China is a leader in manufacturing. This is specifically who sells to the United States, pulling in that our neighbors to the north and south are very important trade partners with us, as well as other countries in that, but China does have a huge impact.
I do have the students predict which country sells the most to us before I show this slide.
They're always kind of surprised how much we get from Canada and Mexico. They don't, because they don't see as many labels at home that say made in Canada or made in Mexico. So we do talk a little bit more about obviously imports and exports and our trade partners. This is that example, I think, yeah, Carol. And so this is, obviously if we haven't been around it, it may not be it may be difficult for students to kind of grasp what's going on there. I just keep reminding them that these boxes are an entire semi without the engine, without the cab and the wheels. So they're going to connect it onto that to deliver it. So it's got to get from the ports to these stores throughout throughout our country.
And some students are not aware when you start talking about that these are the semi without the cab, they're not aware that the back of the semi comes off.
Yeah, yeah.
They think it's like a car, and they don't realize that, they're snap-aparts like Legos, but made better. So, there are things that you need to go through more of an explanation with.
Yeah. And so this is an example of just within the same picture, trying to get kids to recognize how big some of these places are, and especially in these large port cities that we have, and the impact that this obviously has, because with it, you're talking about jobs for the people that are working in these ports, as well as like the robotics, all of that technology that's used to be able to not only transport these many containers, but then to offload them and get them transported to other parts of the United States. This just a container, so just one semi could hold up to 25,000 shirts, or again, thousands of toys or shoes or whatever. And again, this is picking it up, this huge machine picking it up and unloading it off of the ship onto the dock. And then they are put on semis, they're put on trains and distributed throughout the United States. And again, this takes a look at where do these container ships come from, and where are they headed. This is the assignment that we have our students do. And so I want to exit out of this.
And as you start looking at it, don't panic. We walk you through it and we give you the answer sheet.
I'm going to show them the part we walk them through, because just the sheet is I don't want to say overwhelming, but we have help for you.
Yeah.
So go ahead, take it away, Sharon.
So this is the math piece, and we realized very early on we just couldn't hand the activity out to the students on their own, but we also could not hand it out to the teachers on their own. Not because the teachers can't handle the math. It looks overwhelming initially. So here we go. A shipping container is a steel box. It's 20, 28, or 40 feet long, and the containers are designed to fit on a container ship like this. So we're going to figure out how many containers there are and how many items are inside them on a fictitious ship. So this is how stores like Walmart and Target and Home Depot, any store, gets their goods. And things are being imported. Everything we use, toys, phones, furniture, clothing. Because we've gone through the activity of the students looking through their closets, their toy bins, their food, they have a pretty good idea now that it's coming in from all over. So which world region ships the most containers? And we start looking at everything down here. And, my students got wrapped up in the names. They were like, I don't even know what this Guangzhou is. And you have to get them past that and just say, we're looking at generally where they're at. And so then you start looking at the map, talking about where are you seeing a lot of the products coming from? So who's shipping all of this good? Where's it coming from? And so then they get into realizing that a lot is coming from the China area. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. You can start.
I was just going to say, so this is what the assignment looks like for the students. So basically, they're going to try to figure out what it costs to ship a shirt that's been manufactured in another country from that country to the United States. So, we talk about, boy, how expensive would that be? Because, you need fuel for the ship, and then you've got to have fuel for the, to transport it, the trucks and things like that. So it sounds like it's going to be fairly expensive. So this is what we take them through. So, so we just, start out by asking, well, how many do you think would actually fit? Like just t-shirts would just fit in one of those containers. And they have all kinds of crazy guesses before we start. Some are really low and some are really large.
Yeah, you'll find which students really do not have a grasp on numbers, because they'll go 212. And it's like, okay, we're talking about these great big semis. How many t-shirts do you think would fit inside those? But it tells you a whole lot more. Of course, being a math social studies teacher, it told me who I needed to work with a little bit closer. But it really does give you insight as to which students you're probably going to have to help with a little bit more. But we walk them through it, so it works. So let's see how much it costs to ship a shirt from Shanghai, China to Los Angeles. And the first step, the shirts are folded to fit in a box that's 11¼ inches wide, 14 inches long. And yes, I know we included a fraction. How many 14-inch long boxes can you line up along one wall of a 40-foot container, which is 468 inches? So that's the first step. And this is why we knew we had to take you through it. So we explain it. It's, simply a division problem. We're dividing by 14, and that gives them 33 boxes. And then we move to step 2, where we multiply those 33 boxes by 8, because we want to know, is that from ceiling to floor? Yeah, because it's covered. So it goes from ceiling to floor. And so you have 264 in one line. And so I started, I made a rectangular prism, and we would show the first row. And then you go on to the next one. So it's about 9 inches high. Each box. We divide that by 9 to find out that that's 10 boxes, because a box holds 12 shirts, about 9 inches high. So we're filling in all of these with them. So we have 10 layers with 264 boxes in each layer. So we have 2,640. And the kids are really excited when they get that, because they know all they have to do is add a 0 and they got the answer. So then each box can hold 12 shirts. So we multiply, and we, so how many shirts fit in the 40-foot container? And we get 31,680. So now we're talking about the weight. So we have those boxes, they're each 10 pounds. We have 26,400. Because we've got to make sure we're not going to sink that ship. So each box can hold 12 shirts. How many shirts fit in a 40-foot container? I'm sorry, I already did that. The charge for shipping a 40-foot container from Shanghai to LA is $1,300. So how much is it per shirt? We divide the $1,300. It's about 4 cents a piece. And then we have other costs. So we have our 1,300, we add 1,500, and then we divide it by 31,680. And so how much in total cost of shipping is one shirt? About 9 cents. And the kids first are aghast that they're buying it and shipping it for 9 cents. And yet when you go to the store, they're going to go, my mom paid, you know, and it doesn't matter if it's $10 or $20. And so then you have to talk to them about, so, okay, it only costs 9 cents, but why is it more expensive? And they finally come around to realizing that we have to pay the workers that stock it and the storage of them and the overhead of the store, and they want to make a profit. And what my students used to end up coming out with is, so when they put it on sale, like their rock bottom sale, they're still making a profit. I'm like, yep, and that's what you need to know. They're never going to take a deficit if they don't have to, because otherwise their store can't run. So it looks complicated, but really, when we take you through it, you can do it. Everybody can do it.
Yep. And there's just a few more about, you know, why is it so low? We talk a little bit more about outsourcing and that. And then the last thing that we do in this lesson is that we take a look at, we have kind of create a discussion or a debate, and it talks about, you know, should there be more manufacturing jobs in the United States? And it's not a simple question to answer. And so what we look at are, we take 4 different perspectives. So you can either divide kids up into groups, and this group is a group of workers who work in manufacturing. Another group could be the owners, consumers, and then the big box stores. And so if you start to take a look at it, they're all going to have their own perspective, their own opinion of it. And so based on answering that question, they have to give both a positive and a negative consequence to it. And we expect them to use some of the vocabulary that we've been talking about and give evidence of it. If we continue on, it's broken down so that you could give this out to all of the students that are identified as the workers, the owners, you know, the consumers, and then those that own the big box stores where they're at. We did include a rubric that goes along with it. And this is one of those things where it's kind of like a culminating activity where we wanted to give some flexibility for teachers as to, you know, what they've got going on in their classroom, how far they want to take this. Do they include it in a form, like in a debate? Is there some role playing in that? Do they do it as research? So you can make it as big or as small as you want to, but the main thing is that we wanted to get across to the students was that they, you know, it's not a simple question to answer, and there are many different competing interests. And so you have to be able to listen to all those different opinions to be able to try to make us, come up with a solution. So that was the last thing that we had in this unit or in this lesson on trade. I think that's pretty much it for right now. I think we're going to take a break.
Yeah.
And then when we come back, we'll talk about immigration, migration, and we'll get into all kinds of fun stuff there. So I've got about 6:13.
Yeah, come back about 6:25 or 6:30.
6:25. Let's just do a quick 10-minute.
Okay, is
Let's keep
everyone good
things
with that?
Okay.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Yay, looks like we're all back. Awesome. Okay, so we are going to go right on to the next lesson in Unit 3. And we're going to take a look at migration. We're going to look at some examples of immigration. What are the factors involved? And of course, we'll go through some data, look at some changes over time in that, and try to get the kids to connect with the information and maybe able to share some of their own experiences. So I'm going to start, let's see, I'm going to start by sharing my screen. There we go. And so we're going to take a look at immigration through time. We start out right away with, again, some data. This one, I think the kids, they enjoy. They like looking at the old pictures and that. And then also when we start to take a closer look at what are some changes that have occurred through time. I like it when we do have things like these kind of photographs. I like to take a few moments to just have the kids look at and look for details. What do they see? What do they notice? What kind of feelings do they have? What do they think the people in the picture, what kind of feelings they may have or what they're experiencing? And so again, just another good opportunity to give them a chance to be a little bit more observant, especially with some of the evidence that we'll be going through. So we talked to them about their ancestors, people that they're related to, and what their family story may be if they came from another country. We'll use this icon or example of a suitcase as a way to build a graph. So first thing we do is take a look at, again, a world map and have a discussion for it. There is an activity that the kids will do that they can ask family members at home if their family, if some of their ancestors came from a different country and where that may be. And we'll collect data like that. So usually the kids get pretty excited about it. They like to start with, or, to talk about their families and that. We do talk about that most likely, even if they're not aware of it, that their ancestors probably did come from other countries and other parts of the world. And again, this goes back to the whole unit, which is movement. We spent a lot of time in the previous lesson about products, goods, and services moving all over the place, all over the world. And so now we'll take a look at people and how they've moved and what they've done in order to make that happen. So again, here we go. We take a look at this particular picture. Most of them recognize the Statue of Liberty in that. Talk to them about the time period, where they may be coming from, what kind of clues can we get from this And then we start with a graph. Now, again, we talked to them about foreign-born persons, and so they were not born here in the United States. Give some examples in that. And then we look at where did these foreign-born people come from different countries or different continents around the world. We also have the different decades. They are listed at the bottom, going across the bottom. So we have here the foreign-born coming in the 1830s, all the way up to the 1990s. And so there's quite a span there. We talk about how it increases, the trend that we look at, what happened here, and again, what are some other changes or unique things that they see about these graphs. And then they have to look a little bit closer. Each of the suitcases have a symbol within them that represents, and there's a key here to represent which continent. Then we start to ask them some very specific questions. So for instance, here in the 1900s, we see that this was one of the highest points of immigration, and to have them actually count up, how many of those suitcases. Each suitcase represents 500,000 people. So two of them combined would obviously be 1 million people. So we're talking about what an influx of immigrants and where they're coming from, what parts of the world. And then we also take a look about almost 100 years later in the 1990s, and we see that some of those suitcase labels have changed. And we have immigrants coming also from Europe, but Africa, North America, or excuse me, North America and Asia. And they really start looking closely at details like how many suitcases and that. Let's see, and then we do just a comparison of the two. A lot of times, like when I've done this in the classroom, I've had them color it in, use colored pencils. It helps to make it stand out a little bit more, where they can recognize some of the different locations and different continents that they are comparing, and the change that occurs over time. We see obviously that in the 1990s, most of the immigrants came from Europe. We also have some that 500,000 that came from Asia and 500,000 from North America. We have to remind them that it's not just us here in North America. Also, we have Mexico, and Central America is considered part of that. And then the difference in 1990s then, where we see an increase in the number from North America. We also have an increase from Asia and a decrease from Europe. I like this graphic because it shows us that there was such a large number of immigrants that came from Europe during the early 1900s, and a very small group from China. And then we start to see how that changes just over time. We talk a little bit more about the distinctions, and again, we look at what is a legal permanent resident. We give them the definition. Again, this is someone who was not born in the US, but they have been able to obtain that legal permission. And so they can live and work here in the US. And of course, we know the United States keeps track of people, how many people are coming in, where they're coming from. This is another graph that shows us, again, a comparison This is the number of legal permanent residents comparing from 1820 all the way up to 2010. So again, kids start to recognize some things. They notice this huge spike here in the 1980s approximately. And it gets them asking some questions, thinking about it a little bit more. Why did it go up? Why did it go down? What was this? What was happening here where we saw a very limited number? So, and this was 1990s. I also like this because, again, this shows us legal permanent residents from all continents. And so again, we start to take a closer look at it to see where people are coming from, and they want to become legal permanent residents here in the United States. So what regions are they coming from? Of course, we noticed that Europe did have the most, the largest influx of immigrants. So that's when we start to introduce them to things like push and pull. These are, that's what would pull someone to want to immigrate into the US. And so we brainstorm what are some of the reasons that immigrants would come to the United States. Usually students will think about it, and economic reasons, obviously. A lot of different, they'll generate a lot of different reasons. And most of the time they seem to be able to nail it, but sometimes they can go off on different things. So you got to kind of reel them in. And what would be some good things that would pull them here? So we have a pretty good discussion about that. What would be a reason to be pushed out of their homes or away from their home country, their homeland? And so we give some examples that people had to leave. We know that there were many immigrants that came because of these different situations in their country, and that pushed them out of their country. There is a student activity, that they do as well. I think I've included that. So it's pretty much the same thing. The student activity is the graph, and they have to answer some questions and fill that in. Also, they need to include some information, again, using their mapping skills. My students do a really good job with this digitally. This is something, if you're in person, you can print out and hand to the students and have them complete the graphs and add information to the maps, but it works really well both ways. So that opportunity is there. The last thing is, because we are talking about immigrants and asking them, we started by asking them the question, you know, where did their families come from? Did they know about their families? So there is a there's an activity that we've included, and this is something that you have to kind of gauge it as to what, you know, how receptive students are. When I've done this, and I've done this for years, students, I just ask them to ask their family about where they came from. Some of them know where their ancestors came from. Some have no clue. Some students, you know, you hear everything from they were adopted, they were, they're in a step family, just all different kinds of things. And I said, it's with the people you call family. So we don't have to be super specific about it, but it's the people that you live with. Where did they come from? What is their heritage? And because then that influences probably some of their traditions, some of their customs, some of the food that they eat, things like that. Most kids are pretty on board with it, but you do have to be sensitive that some students will be a little unsure about it. And I just try to encourage them. And, there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of work around it if it really does become an issue. So then they just go through, ask some questions. This particular format was to create their own slide presentation, because again, this could be a digital. You could also do it as a poster that they could bring in an artifact from their family, something that, is an example of their culture, their heritage. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it. I like to make sure that they've recorded some information about themselves. They maybe possibly have shared some photographs, things like that. They take a look at the map. This is one that we would keep track of, how many students, or the whole class, where did their ancestors come from. They may possibly want to include another map that would be specific to a country or a continent that their ancestors may have come from. And then they have to describe something that is important to their family that maybe could be considered part of that culture of their ancestors. And then I just want them to try to make a connection with how do they connect with their past, and what did they learn about their family? Is it like a family name that's been carried through generations, or a favorite food, or something else, or even just a connection with where their ancestors may have come from. So it kind of gets them involved. A lot of kids like to do it. I usually don't have too much of an issue with it. Once in a while, you do have a student that's a little reluctant, and there's many different ways to kind of work around that. I think that was it for me. And then let's see, Sharon, you're going to talk a little bit more about immigration and laws.
Yep. So with immigration, the U.S. had laws as to who was allowed to come in and who wasn't. So even though we had people on the ships that were looking at the Statue of Liberty, looking at it as, they finally made it to freedom, they were soon to find out that some of them were not going to be allowed into the U.S. So the photo that you've seen prior with Andrea's presentation is taken in 1902 at Ellis Island, and it's the foreign-born arriving. What not all of them were aware of, some of them were, is that they had to have medical examinations and interview with an inspector. And so some of them would be allowed to stay, some would fail the inspection and be turned back right onto the ship they came off from. So who was allowed? Well, the first thing they had to do is answer 13 questions with an immigration interview. So the inspector would then decide if their answers fit the laws in 1912. And if they did not fit the laws, they would not be allowed to enter or stay. So the questions start out very basic. What is your name? How old are you? Where did you live before coming here? Who paid your passage? They wanted to know that. Where were you going, or where are you going inside the US? Have you a ticket to get there? What is your business? How much money do you have? Today, some people would feel that these questions are not proper, but in 1912, they wanted to know this and more. Andrea, do you have the last word? There we go. They wanted to know, can you read and write? Were you ever in prison or an almshouse? And if you're not aware of what an almshouse is, we have put the definition at the bottom of the questionnaire. Are you an anarchist or a polygamist? Once again, both of those words are defined for the students. Are you coming here under a labor contract? And who is to meet you here? So they wanted to know a lot of information before they ever moved out of the inspection area. And it was really up to the inspectors. So the foreign-born would be called up and speak to an inspector. This is a shot at Ellis Island, and you can see there's a lot of people waiting, and there's people that are standing in front of the inspector. So laws allowed some people to stay, but the inspectors watched out for those that were from particular countries or they had particular characteristics. This is in 1912 because as time changes, so did the laws in the US. And we're going to see later that there were different immigration laws throughout history and even today. So in 1882, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act. So Chinese laborers are not allowed to come into the US between 1882 and 1892. They could not become citizens and they weren't allowed into the US to work. So why was that established? Because American workers were afraid their jobs were going to be taken by the Chinese. In 1885, the Alien Contract Labor Law, the students like the name of that law, by the way, prohibits foreigners from coming into the US if they had made a contract to perform labor. And so if you remember, I would have them go back to the questionnaire and it would ask, do you have a contract? And so we talk about what a contract laborer is. And, these were people that, were already here supposedly with a job and someone had paid for their passage. In 1885, that wasn't allowed to come into our shores. So they would make it on shore and then be turned right back onto the boat. 1903 changes a little bit more. We have the Exclusion Act where anarchists, people who have epilepsy, people who were beggars or prostitutes were kept out. So, we ask the kids, what part do you think is the most important for protecting people in the US? What do we need a law, or what law do we need to protect us? And they're pretty quick at going the anarchist on this one. Once they understand what that is, they do not understand epilepsy, why that would be something that would not be allowed in the US. When they would ask me, I typically would say we didn't know enough about the disease at the time and that it's a medical problem that we now accept because we understand what's happening. In 1907, the Immigration Act prohibited people with certain disabilities. So they were looking for contagious diseases. One of the big one was trachoma, I believe is the way you say it, which is an eye disease, tuberculosis, diphtheria, or a mental disability. So as they went through the inspectors are looking for this, and then they would grade them with chalk, with a letter B if they had back problems, F if it was face or in their head, and H if it was a heart problem. And they were taken out of line and put into another exam room, either medical or mental, or physical or mental, excuse me. And once again, we asked the students, what do you think would be most important? Who should we prevent from coming in? Obviously, we can't change the act. We're just having the students, put themselves in that situation and go, you know, is this someone we should actually be afraid of coming into our country? Or is it someone that could come in, but we have to help them? So up to this point, do they have any questions? And is there a law they think was useful? And is there a law they thought was wrong? Typically, I went through this fairly quick because I would take time when we had each of the laws come up and we would talk about it. And so then we would talk about the ones that most people, the majority of the class, thought were useful or wrong.
Also, there's an activity in our lesson guide following this that we used to do in the classroom, and it is,
Can you bring that up, Andrea, or don't you have that connected?
I don't have it connected, but I can bring it up.
Yeah, I want to go through that. I thought you had it in here. I'm sorry.
Let's see. Well, let's see what else is in here. Just some pictures. Oh, okay. So here it is. This is the activity, but the cards are in a document linked in our lesson guide.
Yeah, but can we go to that? Otherwise, I would have opened up. I didn't realize you didn't have that linked. So the activity gets the entire class or can get them involved. Even if you're online, have some of the students become the inspectors, and then you're going to present a card, and you're going to read from it, and they're going to try and make the decision: were they allowed to stay, were they not, and why were they not being allowed to stay? So they're going to, the inspector would mark them okay to enter, FI needs further inspection, or X or an E to exclude, that they can't answer, or they can't enter, they have to be sent away. So, oh, well, this is okay. This wasn't what I was going to bring up, but so there's 5 men from Bulgaria. If you're in the classroom, I would have 5 of my boys have this card, and they would stand up. They've come over to get a higher education at a college in Massachusetts. One has at least $25. They all look strong and well. You know, would they be allowed to stay or not? And we have 5 cards that you print off. A Slovak family, a mother and 2 daughters. None of them can read and write or speak much English. One child has some trouble with her eyes. The other is lame. The mother has about $6 in money, but she expects her husband to meet her. He's a farmer somewhere in Pennsylvania, but she doesn't know just where. The father paid for the tickets. They're sent to the detention room to wait for news from him. Each time this situation is brought up, you can have the inspectors do it, you can have the class do it, whatever format you want, but they try to determine, are they going to be allowed to enter? Are they going to be put in further inspection or the detention room or a waiting room, or are they going to be put back on the ship? Now, the 5 men from Bulgaria are allowed to enter. The Slovak family, they're put in a holding room until the father arrives. Here's 5 men from Ireland. 1 or 2 of them can read and write a little. They're going to Boston. None of them have much money, lest they should be rejected on that account. One says they have all got work engaged, and pulls out a paper from his pocket. This inadvertently confesses that they had come under a labor contract. These 5 men from Ireland were turned back and put back on the ship. Now, what's happening with this is, if the students were paying attention to the laws, they're able to go through these cards pretty quickly. The students that weren't paying attention, they struggle because they're now not sure, why were these 5 turned back? And so then we talk to them, and that just helps to reinforce how the laws were changing and that they just didn't allow everyone in to the US, even though maybe they were good people to be here. I don't think we need to go through the rest of the cards, Andrea. So there's several situations. We give you the outcome on each of them. These are the doors the inspector would deem that they were okay, further inspection was needed, or they were excluded and would be deported back onto their ship.
One thing that you have to do is you got to remind the kids that they have to act like an inspector
Yes.
if they're given that role. Sometimes they just like to exclude everybody just because they're power hungry. So you kind of have to monitor and moderate some of that.
And I would always have them tell me why. What law are they falling back on to say these people they're not deemed worthy? And when they have to support why, it helps to cut down on what Andrea is talking about. It doesn't omit them, it just helps. So then we show a map.
Oops.
Oh, that's okay. We show a map and we're talking about some of those cards where people are going to New York or Pennsylvania, Minnesota. How are they going to get there? And that was one of the concerns of the inspectors is, okay, you're here and you're saying you're going to Texas. How are you getting there? Most of them you're going to find say that my father's coming, my uncle's coming. I'm sure you'll hear from him. Well, anybody that was sure that they would be hearing from someone typically was put in the further information needed room. They weren't just going to release them and hope they were actually telling the truth.
Yeah, so it takes you through and it tells you what the decisions are. So we do try to get the kids to predict. And that's why, like I said, it's fun to do. It's fun for the kids to get involved in. You might have to make some adjustments in that just because of what we have going on in classrooms and that.
Right. So, you may want to use the cards and put them on separate screens if you're doing it online. But at the end, the students like the stories. They like to be able to try to determine what happened. But ask them, what did they find the most surprising? What would have been the most frightening for them? And which immigration laws do they still now feel are most important? After you go through all of the cards, some of the students have a better idea as to why the immigration laws were put in place. And they'll fall back on some of their prior knowledge and say, well, the country was still building itself and we didn't want to just accept anyone. But then they also get into some pretty good conversations as to who was excluded and why at different times. So we tell you the internet resources that were used. And then if you look at the red video, because there's stories about the workers and immigrants, but it's a good video. It's about 28 minutes long, which for some of you right now, I know that's almost your class period when you're online, but you could assign it as a homework assignment for them to view on their own.
And then that takes us to Carol. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, let's see, laws. I'm doing laws change. Okay. Okay. Oh. I'll just go through it this way. I can't get at my here. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Okay. We are going to look at the importance of laws, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. If the students haven't looked at the graph before, they could look at it again. What I'm going to talk about are laws, and I'm retired, so I get to watch MSNBC or whatever during the day, and I see what's happening at the border. And I really wonder about the laws. So instead of getting all at each other's throats about what's happening today, I wanted to look at laws in the past. And in 1924, there was a law called the Immigration Act, and it tells you that Congress in the past picked favorites. And what it did, it put a limit on the number of people who could come from southern and eastern parts of Europe. That meant that smaller numbers would be allowed in from Italy and from Russia. Russia at the time was really big, and Russia controlled parts of Poland and had a lot of Jewish people living in parts of Russia. But there was a limit on the number who could come from Italy and Russia, whereas a higher number were allowed in from Germany and England, from Northern and Western Europe, mostly because that's where a lot of previous people had come from. And it took a long time, but in 1965, the 1924 Act was repealed. And I actually had neighbors, Italian neighbors, when I lived in New York City, who came after 1965 because more people from Italy were allowed in. The 1965 law says we're not going to have those limits of the previous 1924 law. The 1965 law also said we really would like to have people who have particular job skills, and they were spelled out. And it did recognize that it's important if you still had a brother or a sister or grandma back in Europe or back in the country you came from, you were allowed to gradually bring those people. I had students in New York City. It would take on average at least 5 years to bring a wife or daughters if you were the husband who came here first. There's another really important law. There are dozens and dozens of laws, but I'm pulling out some important examples. There was a 1986 law called the Immigration Reform Act, and this was advocated by President Reagan, who was a Republican from California. And Congress in this law gave what is called amnesty. It's kind of a forgiveness to immigrants who had come illegally without legal documents, and they would get forgiven for coming illegally if they had worked for many years in the United States and if they had obeyed all other laws, if they'd not gotten in any trouble, any criminal trouble. Many of the people who got amnesty had previously come without legal documents, had crossed the border between Mexico and the United States. They had come from Mexico and Central America for jobs. It's kind of important. There was something added to this law. It said, okay, these folks who had worked hard, even though they'd come illegally, they can stay. But from now on, we want employers to make sure that whoever they hire, that they have come across the border legally. So that's an interesting provision in the law. You'll see that after the 1980s, you get this huge column, and it has lots of green symbols, lots of people from North America, meaning not so much Canada, but lots of people coming from the part of North America that includes Mexico and Central American countries. And I mention this because we have a lot of people trying to cross the border today in March 2021 who are from Central America. So this is just to get students to try to remember. We saw some laws in the past. Who got favored in the laws? Who got favored to come into the United States? And then we supply some answers. Well, in the 1924 law, Northern and Western Europeans got favored. In the law after that, people who had job skills or family members could come in. The 1980s law under Ronald Reagan, the law favored people who had, even though they come illegally, had obeyed laws and worked hard. This, I think, is a really important law. I realized when I was thinking about this that students probably don't all understand where Central America is and how close it is to the United States and next to Mexico. So I'll have to figure out where to put this in our discussions, but it's a really important map for understanding today. I tried to bring this up to date and with more recent information I found from the Census Bureau. And going back to 1960 and 1970, you'll see that way more than half of the immigrants in 1960s and 1970s were from Europe. And we come forward, and the blue is Europe, and hopefully the students will see that the bars for Europe keep getting less and less and less because they're a smaller percent of the foreign-born who are coming to the United States. The important color to watch is this ocean blue. This ocean blue is Latin America, and by the year, which includes Mexico and Central America, Spanish-speaking foreign-born, and by the year 2000 and 2010, more than half of all of the foreign-born who are coming into the United States are from Latin America. What they call Northern North America, which would be from Canada, is very, very small. Europe is very small. So just emphasizing, I thought in light of what I see on television today, we have to put into perspective. And I was just been working on this. I really think laws have a role to play in discussing immigration. I put some questions on the next slide. Congress, I think, needs to discuss, can people become citizens if their parents brought them here as young children? That's number one. Number two, should new laws give preference to people who have particular job skills, like in medicine or in computer technology? Number three, should there be new laws that allow immigrants to work in agriculture jobs? And I know that is important to my congressperson. His name is Fred Upton, um, because what I read in the newspapers say that farmers in Western Michigan want people to plant and pick vegetables and fruits. And most of the legal citizens who live here, our citizens, don't want to do that kind of work. And then finally, how many refugees or people who seek asylum because they fear violence, harm, death in the countries where they were born? How many of those kind of people should be allowed in the US? And this is going to be everything I see on television says these are really difficult discussions that Congress is going to have. And I'll stop with that. And okay, we're getting a little bit late. Let me go to another one. We have been looking at 1890. I wanted students to think about, and this really goes back to what they learned in Unit 3 about North America and about the US. If you were an immigrant in 1890, if the inspector at Ellis Island had let you in and you were a dad and you needed to support your family, where would you choose to live in the US? And remember, we had the semi-arid Great Plains and we had the rainy East. So would you be pulled to one of those or the other, or maybe both? Remember how we had the corn region and the cotton region? Which of those would you choose to go to? And these are regions of the US that students could predict. This is where manufacturing jobs were. And that would provide a lot of opportunities for someone coming from Ellis Island in the Northeast. The darker areas on this map are highly productive farmland, where would be a good place to go to. Where did people go to? Notice 4 million people went to the Northeast where manufacturing was. 3.5 million foreign born went to near the Great Lakes, which was also part of the corn region. And look at how few went to the South, where slavery had been. Circles can also show that. Look at the very small circle symbols show foreign born. Very few going into the South where slavery had been. So I think we're getting short on time, so I'm gonna let Sharon and Andrea, I'll stop sharing. I'll let Sharon and Andrea skip to whatever they would like to, they think is most important.
Well, we've got some other things like attitudes towards immigrants.
Andrea, why don't you go to the last slide of the attitudes, or the last couple, and we'll just look at a couple of the quotes.
Of the attitudes?
Yeah. So obviously all the information is there, but what we're trying to, if we take everything and smush it together, what we're trying to get them to do is,
there we go.
That's good.
Have them look at comments that have been made. So an opinion from the Heritage Foundation, the U.S. should reduce the number of low-skill immigrants and increase the number of high-skill immigrants. What kind of immigration does this opinion favor? Then in 2017, I am an immigrant, an American citizen, and a successful businessman. Although small numbers of immigrants are criminals, Americans should not hate all immigrants. And what kind of immigrants does this opinion favor? So we're trying to, we have earlier comments or quotes, and then we have more current, and trying to get the students to hear the comments that were being made and are being made, and what the opinion is and why. So, you know, they're just more jumping points. Carol had inserted one from the Gazette that says immigrants in Michigan have very different backgrounds. Some are physicians, engineers, have more education than native-born Michiganders. Others, agricultural workers, may lack high school diplomas, but farmers in Western Michigan want to hire them. In 2015, immigrants were more likely to start a new business than native-born Michiganders. So once you take them through, the students actually do have good discussions on these and talk about what immigrants these opinions favor or are, you know, trying to hold out of the state, out of the U.S. Andrea, do you want to move to the refugees and displaced?
Okay, so we talked about pull factors, and these are push factors. We take a look at refugees and what would be, obviously a reason for people to have to leave their country. These are people that are displaced because of the situation in their country. It's too dangerous for them, so they have to move away. A lot of times they end up in these refugee camps, which are temporary housing that ends up, for many of them, becoming long-term, unfortunately. Here's some other examples of that. And again, just talking about the change and the disruption in their lives when they have to flee their country, and what the effect is on on the families that go through that. We also, here's, we have more examples of it, but it reminds me of Home of the Brave that we started the year with, and how the child that came from the Sudan, and how that was disorienting to come to Minnesota and so completely out of their element and confused by so many things around him. And he always longed to go home or to see his family, his mom and that, but so it wasn't necessarily his decision to have to leave, but he was forced out. So again, we go through the distinction between a refugee and a displaced person. We talk about the United Nations programs that help to try to provide aid for these different groups. We look at obviously the locations where that is, where some of these refugee camps are, where people are leaving. So again, it takes, there's a student activity that goes along with it to help the students get a better understanding of it. But it is kind of a sensitive subject, and it's a hard one, but it's a reality of our current situation. And so I think it's something that the kids actually it gives them an opportunity to create some empathy, to think about what that situation would be like if they were like we read the story in Home of the Brave about that young boy. So putting ourselves in his shoes. That was the last activity that we were going to show. There was the long walk to water, Sharon, that I attached, just that you had some wonderful descriptions of it. And
Yeah, so I do want to address this one. Andrea, do you have the book to show by chance? So
yeah,
a long walk to water, a lot of people have already read at some point. But so could you flip back now to the questions? You've been used to our literature where either by chapter or by page, there's been a question. In A Long Walk to Water, we went a different route, and our suggestion is you have your students follow either Salva or Naya. And they have the choice, but then they're going to follow that character throughout, because this story is coming from two different children, one that is fleeing from war-torn country, and the other one that is having to walk miles for what they think is fresh water, but it actually is not, and what she goes through. And so every chapter, there's a question for either Salva or Naya for the students to respond to. The story, if you haven't read it, it's a little hard at the beginning because you keep going back and forth between the characters, but it all comes together at the end. And Salva has grown up and is an adult, and he is meeting Naya. So there are suggested questions throughout the book. Obviously, you don't have to use all of them, none of them, some of them, but it gives you something to work off from. You don't have to feel like you've got to read the whole book and start coming up with your own lesson plan. In this unit, we also have the book Inside Out and Back Again, which is a child and her family fleeing from Saigon, from the Vietnam War. And I believe her name is just Ha or Hai. I don't know how to say the pronunciation marks. And she is a young girl who was very content in Saigon and very quickly had to leave. And they're leaving on a Navy boat, and their boat chooses a different route than most of the other boats. And it takes her through her adjustment, and she has a lot of heart adjustments to go through. She cries, she becomes very angry. And one of the comments near the end of the book, which is something I have the students respond to, is she said, I would rather be back home. When she's referring to Saigon, she knows it's war torn. And so, you know, I have the students reflect, why would she want to go back home knowing it's such a dangerous place? But at that moment in her life, you know, she's not thinking this is a better place to be. She lives her first year, and that's what you're reading in the book, is the first year of her life. The other book we have is Grandfather's Journey. This is not about somebody who had to leave. He chose to leave. He wanted to see the world. He left Japan dressed in what he called English clothes for the first time on his transport. It is another award-winning book, but it talks about him leaving Japan, coming to the US, finding similarities, like the wheat fields. It would remind him of being back in Japan. He lived here until an adult, and as an older adult, moved back to Japan. And as soon as he was in Japan, he started wanting to be back in the US. So it's that push pull, but in a different way. And the only short, I mean, it's a very quick read. There's like 2 sentences on every page. The pictures are gorgeous, but it gives some of our students perspective that not everyone who came here was a push pull, because we're pretty heavy on that this unit. And so we want to make sure that they do understand some people were just choosing to move to the US because they were looking for a different life and what they thought would be a better life. Also, you can refer back to, as Carol or Andrea had mentioned, Home of the Brave, Chuju's House, all of your prior reads. If you can't get through all of these books, we fully understand.
One last thing that we have, kind of as a way to wrap up the unit or the lesson. Oh shoot, I'm not sharing, sorry. I got to get back to where I was at. Let's try that again. We take a look at stories of migration. And we look at it through the lens of GSPEC. So we give you a couple of different charts that you can use and some suggestions. We look at different types of migration. Again, it could be the students, they could elaborate on their family, the Great Migration of African Americans, the removal of Native Americans, and what's going on today in the current situation. There's just so many different things to look at. You can, assign them a country or a group of people that were immigrating at the turn of the century. It's just, there's so many different opportunities with that. But you can either have them look at it through that lens. So what are they, either where are they, why are they coming here? What is the expectation, based on the geography, social, political, could be what are they leaving? Or you could do a comparison of the two. What are they leaving from their country to immigrate here in the United States, or from their previous location to their new location? So there's just a lot of different ways to look at it. It's one of the things that we've been working on to try to give the kids an opportunity to spend a little bit more time investigating at the end of this unit. And that's pretty much it, I think.
Yeah.
Carol, did we forget anything?
I think we're good. Well, we covered a lot.
We did. So,
And
I guess the question, or it's, are there any questions? I know you've put in some comments in the chat and things like that. It looks like we've, for the most part, have been able to touch base with them. But again, if there is anything that comes up or that you have a question about, it's really easy to get in touch with any of us.
Mm-hmm.
Any closing thoughts from Dave or Roy or our the teachers that are here?
Major. I just want to thank you and Carol and Sharon greatly for, the panic in 6th grade teachers across the state at the beginning of the school year when they realized that the Accelerate wasn't going to work for them. And the speed at which we were able to assemble these troops and get them going, I think we should give them all a round of applause for that, because we've been meaning to recap the giant sessions for a while because the originals were done in Adobe Connect and that just doesn't transfer to YouTube. So now we've got really clean, concise video recaps of the units. You've got these units in Canvas that you can pull for forever and and until we move on to the next LMS as a state, I guess. But so tomorrow. But these lessons are going to stay up. They live in Google Drive, and we really, really, really appreciate all of the work that the three of you have put into building these initially and revising them every year on the dot.
Wait, we're one step ahead of the sheriff.
That's about it too.
Michelle, go ahead.
I don't know if this is helpful or not. I had meant to send some over to Andrea. I started using Loom to record myself reading the slides to help some of my students that
Oh, yeah.
maybe, well, different reasons that it might be useful for them to have the material read to them in these times.
Yeah.
And I'm not this far ahead, but I apologize because I had meant to send it to you and tell you if it was useful. You were welcome to do whatever you wanted to with it.
Mhm.
So
I think that's great. I think it's also a great support for students if they were absent, for maybe even students with special needs that might need to have access to the information or have it read to them. So yeah, there's like a lot of different uses for that. So
I apologize for having not shared, and I still intend to. And if you're needing something, I'm happy to give anything I have, even if sometimes I may have forgotten to proactively give it.
Thank you.
I want to ditto Dave's comments. And in addition to that, although we've had small numbers on these evenings, don't read into that. I've talked to a lot of teachers who are very, very, very thankful for the work that you're doing, and a lot of the inability to be here was conflicts with family and that kind of thing. And I think we're going to get a lot of mileage out of the videos as well as the extensive work that you've done. So thank you so much, especially for the teachers in Genesee County and Lapeer County.
Absolutely. And
I'm
I'm
one
over.
of those teachers in
Oh.
Genesee County, and I'm very grateful for the work you did with this. I have been putting these into Canvas myself and using them. It's been tremendously helpful. I was really disappointed to be called to a curriculum meeting and be given textbooks to preview. And I put this in as my plug. I love what you've done, and I'm very, very grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm in a district over by Lansing, and just this evening we had our little sign up sheet come through because we are previewing, reviewing, looking at materials and curriculum and things for, coming up. And I pushed the button like I want to be on the social studies, and I've been trying to pass these links on to everybody all year, even though they're overwhelmed and virtual. So I'm really hoping that our district in our 5-6 building, at least for the 6th grade, is going to allow me to do this and then love it and bring them all on board. So,
Well, I asked our administrator to talk to you, Roy, so just give you a heads up. They're coming after you.
Yeah, calls are coming in for sure.
Well, it is 7:30, so we don't want to keep you guys any later. Thank you, all of you, for all the work this year. And if you need anything from any of us, you know how to get a hold of us.
We'll be calling, Dave.
yep. Thanks for spending your evening with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys have a great rest of the year.
You too.
Thank you. You too.